Good morning, Year 12. Today we're going to be talking about the commercial and political life of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Commercial life. Unlike the quieter fishing resort town of Herculaneum, Pompeii appears from the evidence to have been a bustling commercial centre in the years before its destruction, a place where trade served as a leveller in society and where making a profit and accumulating wealth was regarded as being favoured by the gods. Some of this evidence includes the high number, about 600 so far excavated, of privately owned shops, workshops, bars and inns. The city controlled markets around the forum, trade signs depicting various manufacturing processes and service industries, the epigraphic evidence of the number of guilds of tradesmen and retailers, images of Mercury, the patron god of commerce, financial gain, messages, communication, travellers, boundaries, luck, trickery and thieves, displayed everywhere to gain blessings on a sign outside of a shop, on a sales counter, as part of a series of scales, or on the wall of a workshop. The 20 or so maritime workshops, warehouses containing objects characteristic of a port area and buildings lined with wine jars. Paintings of cargo boats on the Sarno and porters carrying products to be loaded onto vessels. Inscriptions on walls and floors of houses and workshops paying tribute to the pursuit of profit. Profit is joy, found in the mosaic entrance way of the house of two wealthy men, Syracuse and Numerianus. Welcome gain inscribed around the impluvium in the house of a carpenter, and here dwells happiness, and scrawled on the wall of a bakery. Industries based on agriculture and fishing. The economic base of all Vesuvian towns, employment, trade, manufacture and profit, was largely based on agricultural production and fishing. 1. Agriculture was the most respectable way of earning a living, and those with large land holdings enjoyed great status. The numerous medium-sized farmlands and villas associated with a farm or vineyard or villa rusticae that dotted the Sarno plain, about 150 properties discovered so far, as well as the market gardens or horti within the walls of Pompeii, provided the raw materials, wine, olive oil, cereals, fruit, vegetables, meat and wool for much of the retail and industrial workforce. The fishing fleets that plied the coastline of Naples provided the much valued crustacean, mollusks and fish, the latter also used for making the garum or fish sauce for which Pompeii was renowned, and which was a source of great wealth. The resources also spawned a host of other industries such as pottery, since terracotta and ceramic containers, dolia and amphorae, were needed for storage, and trade in wine, oil and garum. Wine and oil production. Wine and oil were the principal sources of income for the people in the Vesuvian area. Generally, the profitable cultivation of both vineyards and olive groves could be undertaken by wealthy landowners because of the cost of the long wait between planting and the first harvest, and the cost of wine and olive presses. Wealthy Romans and Pompeians, like the banker Caecilius Jucundus, annexed country farms and added elaborate residential quarters for them to stay in when visiting. Although these villas, like the villa of Pisanella at Boscariolo, were luxurious, their primary focus was agricultural production, vineyards, olives and rearing of livestock, with professional facilities are set aside for the treatment and conservation of produce. A threshing floor, a barn for storage of fodder, a large room containing a large room containing presses for the production of wine and oil, Torcularium, cellars and courtyards with terracotta jars buried into the floors for storage, cramped quarters for labourers and slaves. Wine production. Generally, wine doesn't appear to have been stored in large quantities in taverns and bars, but brought in from the countryside when needed. These country villas had rooms or torcularia for pressing the grapes, and for fermentation, cellae vineare. The torcula, or press, consisted of a solid wooden crossbar fixed at one end and pushed downward by means of a winch with an arm lever. Districts with mild climates store their wine in jars and bury them completely or partially in the ground, thus protecting them from the weather. Spaces must be left between jars to prevent anything likely to affect the wine from passing from one to the other, as the wine very soon became tainted. That's Pliny the Elder. The villas of Boscariol, the Villa of Pisanella and the Villa Regina possessed huge storage capacities. The former had an internal courtyard of 120 dolia that could hold up to 50,000 litres, while the latter had 18 dolia holding 10,000 litres. The wine was transported to town in large wineskins or culiae. They then decanted into amphorae or dolia for storage and serving the numerous taverns and bars. A wide variety of wines were produced in the Vesuvian area. A sign on a Herculaneum wine bar inviting patrons to come to this sign of the bowls advertised half a dozen types of wine and their vintages. Another tavern advertisement confirms that there was a wide range of wines sold in Pompeii. Drink here for just one, as for 2 asses you can drink better, and for 4 you can have some really good Falernian wine. From Plini's natural history and evidence from labelled wine jars, it seems the 2 most famous local wines were Vesuvianum and Pompeianum. But judging from a scroll on the wall of a Pompeii bar, the quality of wine varied considerably. As to the wines of Pompeii, they have arrived at their full perfection in 10 years, after which they gain nothing by age. They are also found to be productive of headache, which often lasts as long as the 6th hour of the next day. So in other words, you get a hangover. That's Pliny the Elder. Innkeeper of the devil, die drowned in your own piss wine. You sell the inferior stuff, but you keep for yourself, you swine, the good bottles. That was from an inscription in the book Glory and the Grief. Vineyards were not restricted just to the countryside. There were commercial vineyards within the city of Pompeii itself, one close to the amphitheatre with a room set for wine pressing and a shed with embedded dolia, each of which could fill 40 amphorae. Evidence of smaller vineyards was found in the open space attached to the house of the ship Europa, as well as adjoining the inns of Euxinus and of the gladiators, where the grapes were pressed on the premises. Oil production. Some estates that produced wine also produced oil. The Villa of Pisanella kept enough storage jars for 5,910 litres of oil. Pliny describes in his natural history the best time to gather the olives for the most pleasant taste. The gathering of the olive follows that of the grape, And there is even a great degree, even a greater degree of skill required in preparing oil than in making wine. For the same very olives that will frequently give quite different results. The first oil of all, produced from the raw olive before it has begun to ripen, is considered preferable to all the others in flavour. In this kind, too, the first droppings of the presses are most esteemed, but diminishing gradually in taste and value. The riper the berry, the more greasier the juice, and the less agreeable the taste. To obtain a result both abundant and of excellent flavour, the best time to gather it is when the berry is just on the point of turning black. Most of the pressing was done on the estates, even though olive presses were found in Pompeian houses and in the Forum granary. Cato, in his On Agriculture, recording that Pompeian presses were built from lava stone, were the best, because the cause of oil is warmth. Presses and storeroom had to be warmed by huge fires. Tripetta were on the first pressing to separate flesh from pip so that the oil did not get a bitter taste. A tripettum consisted of a circular basin with two mill wheels joined by a wooden beam that revolved on an iron spindle fixed into the sides of a basin. The second pressing was done with the same press as for grapes, torcula. The first oil from the press is the richest, and the quality diminishes with each successive pressing. Age imparts an unpleasant taste to oil, and after a year it is old. Within the Pompeii, oil workshops retailed oil, and it is believed that there may have been an olive market in the Forum. Oil was used for cooking, particularly in the hot food bars, which served a service to those who had limited cooking facilities in their home. For lighting, in public baths and gymnasia for rubbing into bodies, a practice disapproved by Pliny the Elder, which he blamed on the Greeks. As a chief ingredient in the manufacture of perfume, which Pliny says was the most pointless of all luxuries. It is one of the properties of oil to impart warmth to the body and to protect it against the action of cold, while at the same time it promotes coolness in the head when heated. The Greeks, those parents of all vices, have abused it by making it minister to luxury and employing it commonly in the gymnasium. Although Pompeians produced their own wine and oil, they imported other varieties from Spain, Sicily and Crete. However, it is not known with any certainty yet just how expensive their exports were to other parts of the empire. The occasional Pompeian amphora, tile or pottery container has turned up beyond Italy, but some scholars believe their export trade was minimal. In the past, it is believed that the red slip clay vessels found in Pompeii came from other parts of Italy or much further afield, but an Australian researcher, J. Mackenzie Clark, attached to Macquarie University, has investigated the chemical composition of the clay and matched it to the clay found in the Bay of Naples area. She has confirmed that pottery was a thriving local industry and is challenging previously held assumptions that most pottery was imported from the East. Her work may throw more light on Pompeii's overseas wine and oil trade. Textile and associated industries. Wool was the basis of some of the most important industries in Pompeii. The washing and dyeing of wool and manufacture of cloth, a painted sign over the Pompeian workshop of N. Vercilius Vericundus, an eminent mill owner and cloth merchant, showed the various processes involved in cloth manufacture. Right, the raw wool was first degreased by boiling in leaden boilers. Once carded, it was taken to spinners and weavers, either in private homes or in workshops. The cloth was next dyed, often in bright colours such as purple or saffron. The finished product was distributed to cloth merchants. Associated with the manufacture of cloth was the production of felt to make slippers, hats, blankets, and cloaks. It was impregnated with heated vinegar, creating a matted effect, and then pushed and pressed until it reached the right consistency. 4 felt workshops have been identified in Pompeii. A significant business connected to the manufacture of textiles was the laundering, bleaching, and recolouring of cloth, usually carried out in Fulonici or laundries, 18 of which were scattered throughout Pompeii. 4 of these, like the Fullery of Stephanus, were large. Some occupied the rooms of private houses, possibly rented, and were identified by a number of interconnected basins or tanks with built-in steps for washing and rinsing. Workers trod the cloth in a miller of fuller's earth, potash, carbonate of soda, and urine because of its ammonia content. Although camel urine was most prized, laundries usually had to make do with human urine, and male passers-by were urged to supply their urine by filling the jugs hanging outside. There were special areas set aside for urine collection, and during the reign of Vespasian, a tax was levied on urine. The fullers then rinsed, dried, and brushed the cloth. Lucius Veranius Hypatius dried his fabric on brick pillars between the Corinthian columns of a large atrium, while another fuller, Stephanus, hung the wet clothes over canes on the upper floor and in the courtyard. Once dried, the cloth was bleached with sulphur and then dyed. The milling and baking of bread. Bread was the basic foodstuff for the inhabitants of Vesuvian towns. The 30 or so bakeries, pistrina, that have been identified in Pompeii saved the householders from buying their grain, milling it into flour themselves, and baking their own bread. Some bakeries were involved in the whole process of production, milling, baking, and selling the bread. Others simply baked the bread from ready prepared flour and dispatched it to small shops and stalls in the surrounding streets. Nowhere in the city was very far away from a bread outlet, although there seemed to be a cluster of 7 bakeries within 100 metres northeast of the Forum. Mills, one of the most common sights today in Pompeii, were comprised of 3 parts: a fixed conical block, a masonry base for collecting the flour, and a hollow cylinder into which was inserted a pole turned by mules or donkeys. The brick ovens were heated by burning vine faggots, and once hot enough, they were cleaned out in readiness for baking the small round loaves of bread. Pompeian bakeries produced 10 different kinds of bread, but because of the poor quality of the flour, it was very hard, and due to the lack of yeast, it deteriorated quickly. Their loaves were marked off in 8 sections for easy baking. In the bakery of N. Pompeius Priscus, a member of a prominent Pompeian family, 81 loaves of bread were recovered, still in the oven where they were placed on the morning of the eruption. One of the largest bakeries in Pompeii was part of a 2-story residence known as the House of the Chaste Lovers, located on Via del Abbondanza. This was one of the few buildings in Pompeii to retain its upper story, and gained its name from a fresco depicting 2 couples reclining on dining lounges during a banquet. One couple in a gentle embrace. The bakery had four flour mills, a dough preparation area, a huge brick oven, a bread shop, two rooms used as stables, one of which could be entered by a side door in an alley off the main thoroughfare. That the owner had 7 animals identified as horses, mules, and donkeys. The skeletons of 2 were found in one stable, apparently trying to escape at the time of the eruption. The other 5 were tethered in the second stable, where their skeletons remain to this day. An oversized and richly decorated dining room with a large window looking out onto garden, which indicates that it may have been used as a place where people came to eat, although entry would have been either past the flour mills or the stables. The manufacture of garum. Pompeii was renowned for its garum, a fish sauce that was one of the main condiments for flavouring Roman cuisine. According to Pliny, no other liquid except unguents has come to be more highly valued. Garum was a potent mix made from the guts of fish and other parts that would normally be considered as refuse, particularly probably gills, intestines, and blood. Although it was popular with most people, some like Seneca hated its foul smell because of its stench. It was probably manufactured outside the city walls, although its smell still would have pervaded the city. The entrails or sprats or sardines, the parts that could not be used for salting, were mixed with finely chopped portions of fish and one with roe and eggs, and then pounded, crushed, and stirred. The mixture was left in the sun or in a warm room and beaten into a homogeneous pulp until it fermented. When this liquamen, as it was called, had been reduced over a period of 6 weeks for evaporation, it was placed in a basket with perforated bottom through which the residue filtered slowly into a receptacle. The end product decanted into jars was the famous garum. The dregs left over were also regarded as edible and known as alec. There were various flavors depending on the type and quality of the fish and its method of preparation. Apparently, the valuable red mullet made the best garum, followed by tuna, mackerel, and sardines, while anchovies were used for less refined sauces. A product indispensable to the production of garum was salt, and the Pompeians skillfully exploited a depression near the coastal road of Herculaneum to make a salt plant. Salt water, washed up by the high tides, entered a channel into a large, shallow basins where it evaporated in the sun. As its concentration increased, it was allowed to flow into progressively concentrated pools. Eventually, the pure crystallized salt was collected with spades from the final basin. Aulus Umbricius Scaurus was the biggest garum manufacturer and dealer in Pompeii. He is believed to have owned at least 6 workshops producing garum, as well as importing garum from Spain for resale in Pompeii. Judging from the vast mansion he built with views over the sea, there was certainly a fortune to be made out of rotten fish. Other manufacturing industries. There were workshops or officinae, some found still with their signs advertising their trades. The evidence suggests 50 different kinds. For example, there were builders and carpenters like Diogenes, whose street sign depicted chisels, trowels, mallets, and plumb lines. and surveyors, sorry. Oh dear, I was trying to stop that sneeze, I do apologise. One of whom had his measuring rods, stakes, and a cross for laying out straight lines sculpted on his tomb. There were potters and brickmakers, metal workers such as coppersmiths, and workers in bronze. These trades were probably carried out beyond the walls due to possible fire risks. There were goldsmiths, silversmiths, gem cutters, and glassmakers, architects and painters, stonemasons, and workers in marble, ironmongers and wheel makers, plumbers, weavers, and perfume makers. Markets and shops. The markets on both sides of the Pompeian Forum were the property of the city, administered by two city magistrates who made sure that the markets ran smoothly, goods were measured and priced accurately, quality was maintained, city regulations were upheld. For example, traders were only permitted to bring their goods to the market at dawn or in the evening to avoid traffic congestion, and no wheeled traffic was permitted in the forum. Despite the difficulty in identifying the purpose of many of the large buildings surrounding the forum, what follows are the currently favoured guesses. The Mycelium on the northeastern side of the forum was a busy market specialising in the sale of fish and meat and possibly fruit and vegetables. Its location was chosen so that its pedestrian traffic would not disturb the normal life of the main forum space. It consisted of a large arcaded courtyard with shops wedged between marble columns of the portico on the southern side. In the centre was an unusual building, a large covered market called a tholos, bounded by 12 columns. In its centre was a pool believed to be for live fish. Large quantities of fish scales and bones have been found in the underground channel that linked the pools with the drains. So it was probably where fishmongers cleaned, filleted, and sold their catch, as well as fish for eating and making of garum and all kinds of mollusks and crustaceans. There was a variety of meat, lamb, beef, veal, pork, and poultry for sale in the Mycelium. The Mycelium also featured a beautiful panelled painting in the fourth style, a small raised temple, statues of an emperor, and notable Pompeian dignitaries, probably those who financed the building, a section of which that may have been used for sacrificial banquets or as an auction room and a money changer's booth. On the other side of the forum was a market or auditorium where dried cereals and pulses were sold to individuals and bakeries. Its entrance had 8 openings to facilitate the movement of customers, and in a recess to the south was a weighing table, mensa ponderaria, a marble slab with 9 circular cavities of different capacities for inspecting and measuring the foodstuffs sold by the shopkeepers. Augustus had attempted to standardize all weights and measures throughout the empire, and in Pompeii, according to an inscription on the weighing table, it was the magistrate Aulus Clodius Flaccus who carried out the changes. Peddlers gathered in the forum on market day and sold an array of manufactured goods, such as shoes and floral garlands, while local farmers from the countryside and owners of market gardens within the city set up their stalls in squares, under arcades, and anywhere that was frequented by the inhabitants of the town to sell their surplus agricultural and garden products. With so much commercial activity centered on the forum and so many people milling around on market days, the Pompeian authorities were obliged to provide a public latrine adjacent to the granary. It was screened off by a vestibule and could accommodate 20 people at one time, with no privacy. Shops, or tabernae. The main commercial thoroughfare in Pompeii was the road that ran from the Forum past the amphitheatre to the Sarnium Gate. Remains of shops along this road and others can be recognised by a wide opening onto the street and the long groove in the stone threshold where a wooden shutter slid back during the day. Many had a back room or a mezzanine accessed by internal stairs to which were the living quarters of the shopkeeper. It is quite possible that the premises of a cloth merchant, a gem cutter or perfume vendor might be adjacent to a greengrocer, a garum seller, a wine and hot food bar, or a rag and bone vendor, all interspersed with entrances into grand residences in the insula behind. Shop and workshop owners advertise their businesses with painted trade signs or paintings on the outsides of the walls. About 200 public eating and drinking places have been identified with Pompeii, which seems a large number for the domestic population of the city, but of course would have catered for visiting sailors and traders and those who came in from the rural areas during the week. Some were simply fast food snack bars known as thermopolia and recognised by marble-covered counter in which large dolia were encased, display racks for wine amphorae decanted into jugs for serving, and a small stove for cooking hot meals. It has been suggested that some might have served as a type of grocery store and that the dolia embedded in the counter perhaps contained dry goods, some of which were sold as snacks. In most of these places, food was taken away or eaten standing up. One of the largest, found in the Herculaneum opposite the Palestra, had two spacious entrances. Wine bars and taverns, capani, were scattered throughout both towns, but in Pompeii they were more densely clustered near the entrance gates and around the amphitheatre. Some had a room or rooms at the back with benches for customers. In others, there were couches for wealthier clients to recline on while eating and drinking. It seems that many Pompeians were heavy drinkers. Two graffiti declared, "Cheers, we drink like wineskins, and Suavis demands full wine jars please, and his thirst is enormous." However, most people drank their wine diluted. They mixed it with water and added other ingredients such as honey, milk, ashes, lime, almonds and seawater to enhance its flavour. They also sweetened sour wine with a sweet-tasting lead acetate syrup made by boiling the dregs of wine in lead-lined copper pans for several days. A particular favourite with Pompeians was hot wine. One of the better-known establishments was that of a woman named Asinilla, who employed foreign waitresses called Smyrna, Maria, and Agil. Some believed they were prostitutes. Sums showing customers' debts were scrawled on the inside walls of her inn, while political slogans painted on the outside walls revealed her interest in the forthcoming elections. Service industries. Hotels. Visiting traders could find a bed for the night in one of the hotels close to the port or within the city. A building named the Hostel of the Muses, after one of its dazzling paintings, was discovered on the bank of the ancient course of the Sarno, from where it would have had a view of over the sea. Some of its unusual features: a small jetty, banqueting areas consisting of at least 8 rooms, brilliant frescoes in the dining rooms, and an exceptionally large kitchen which could feed at least 50 guests, is believed it is believed that it was a hotel for wealthy traders. Another hotel near the Forum could sleep 50 people, 4 to a room, while the 2 hotels just inside the Herculaneum and Stabian gates had dining rooms, bedrooms, stables, a water trough, and a garage shed for wagons. It appears that the owners also provided for their guests entertainment with the upstairs rooms accessed by a side door for the discreet entry of local women. Brothels and prostitution. Because moral values were set by men, prostitution was seen as a normal part of their everyday sex life, and there was no stigma attached to them visiting a brothel or a tavern. A tavern girl from Syria, an artist with her sinuous hips keeping time to the castanet, after a few drinks she dances seduction in the smoky taverns, elbows flashing to the shrill of the flute. And that was an Appendix Virgiliana, by which was translated by H.R. Fairclough. Of course, wealthy men had no need to visit a brothel. They could invite a prostitute to their homes, use one of their household slaves, or visit the home of a high-class courtesan skilled in the art of lovemaking. However, despite the acceptance of prostitution, those who engaged in sex for payment were stigmatized. One of the names given to them was lupa, or she-wolf. Others provided their services in the back streets. In fact, the word fornicate comes from the Latin word fornix, meaning arch. Sometimes taverns provide functions as brothels, and there is no doubt that the occupation of a woman called hedon, or pleasure in Greek, who ran one, but we know nothing of the other women who slept with men to make a bit of extra money on the side. The 3 criteria often used for identifying brothels, once believed to cluster in one area of the city, were a masonry bed in a small room, sexual graffiti, and the presence of erotic paintings. But Thomas McGinn, in the Economy of Prostitution in the Roman World, questions the reliability of these criteria and suggests that prostitution was not limited to particular locations, but was an integral part of Pompeian life, and that we need much more evidence to understand prostitution as an economic enterprise. It seems that sex for money was almost as diffused through the town as eating, drinking, or sleeping. No brothel has been identified in Herculaneum, and despite the amount of archaeological material in Pompeii relating to this occupation, only one building so far excavated appears to have been exclusively used as a brothel or lupanar. This large 2-story corner building comprised 10 rooms, 5 running off a corridor on the ground floor with a latrine at the end, and 5 more upstairs with a separate entrance. Its walls are still covered in erotic paintings showing couples in various positions, but it is believed that these were used simply to stimulate the men rather than advertise the various services provided. Prostitutes were predominantly foreigners, judging by the names in the graffiti, and most of their customers came from the lower classes. The cost varied from between 16 asses to as little as 2 asses, or the price of a loaf of bread or a jug of wine. They were supposed to be registered with the Aedile, and on the 23rd of April each year was set aside as a holiday for them. Port activities. The port of Pompeii was less than a kilometre from the centre of the city. The remains of 20 warehouses have been excavated. They contained weights for anchoring boats and fishing gear, as well as amphorae and a statue of Neptune, god of the sea, to whom departing sailors made sacrifices. The port was a transshipment point for local and foreign goods. Once the ship was unloaded, the goods were transferred to barges for the journey up the Sano River to inland towns such as Nuceria and onto wagons for this short trip into Pompeii. Two notable Pompeian business people. Apart from the wealthy garum manufacturer Aulus Umbricius Scaurus, there were two others who had high business profiles: Lucius Caecilius Jucundus and Julia Felix. Lucius Caecilius Jucundus. The basilica fronting onto the forum is believed to have been not only the law court, but an exchange where businessmen or speculators met clients and signed contracts. One man who would have probably frequented the basilica was the wealthy Lucius Caecilius Jucundus, the son of a freedman who appears to have made his wealth by conducting auctions, lending money to merchants, renting and selling land, properties, businesses and slaves, collecting local taxes on behalf of the city. We know this from the 150 wax tablets found in his Pompeian house. There were records of Jucundus's various transactions between 27 and 62 AD, although most focused on the years 52 to 58 AD. These have proved extremely valuable in understanding financial dealings in Pompeii, particularly what was being bought and sold. Jucundus is often referred to today as an ancient banker, but he does not fit our modern understanding of the word. Mary Beard says he was a characteristically Roman combination of auctioneer, middleman and moneylender. He was profiting from both sides of the auction process, not only charging commission to sellers, but also lending money at interest to the buyers to enable them to finance their purchases. Most of the entries in the wax tablets were receipts for rent and loans. Apart from a few payments over 20,000 sesterces, the average amount he paid was around 4,500 sesterces. These transactions, however, were not his only source of wealth. According to some of the documents, he was involved in tax collection for the city, such as market taxes from stall holders and from those who rented public grazing lands. He took a profit for himself out of this activity. If he was indeed the owner of the villa of Pisanella at Boscarol, as well as his house in Pompeii, then he was also the owner of a hoard of some 100 pieces of beautiful silverware, as well as gold coins and jewels found in a chest hidden at the villa of Boscarol. These finds confirm his great wealth. Julia Felix. The cognomen, meaning fortunate one, was a wealthy widow, property owner and businesswoman. She inherited her landholdings and money from her family, believed to have been freedmen, and owned a magnificent estate in Pompeii that took up a whole insula. Her large estate had suffered damage during the earthquake of 62 AD, and sometime later she transformed parts of her home into a privately run commercial bars for elite clients, shops, taverns and mezzanine lodgings and upper floor apartments, advertising them for rent to Pompeian residents who had lost their homes and businesses. In the property of Julia Felix, the daughter of Spurius, elegant thermal baths for refined people, shops and lodgings above and apartments on the first floor to let for 5 years from the 1st of August until the 1st of August of the 6th year. The contract may be renewed by mutual agreement after 5 years have passed. Sorry, Year 12, this is quite a long chapter. Local politics. Like all provincial towns, Pompeii and Herculaneum were self-governing in local matters, but subject to imperial decrees from Rome, although the emperor rarely interfered except where the empire's wealth and security and local order were threatened. The inhabitants did not rail against any interference where it occurred, and locally constantly demonstrated their loyalty to their imperial family by constructing dedicatory statues, shrines, arches, and buildings to them. We must always remember that many of the confident claims of modern scholars about how local government worked in Pompeii are drawn not from evidence found in or about the town itself, but from documents that refer to their other albeit similar communities, and that is Mary Beard. There are many gaps in our knowledge of the day-to-day details of political life, such as exactly how and where government businesses were conducted on a daily basis, and exactly how the annual city elections were held. It is likely that it was all much more informal than in larger cities, although we do know from the election slogans painted on the walls throughout the city that political activity was intense, leading up to the elections in March of each year. Competition among those eligible to hold office was apparently quite fierce, although it is doubtful, as Cicero wrote, that it was harder to gain a seat in the city council of Pompeii than in the Senate of Rome. Organisation of local government. A board of 4 was the executive arm of the government, which consisted of 2 duumviri, or duumvir, and 2 aediles. The duumviri, these 2 men, were the most senior officials in the city. Duumviri administered the electoral rolls, were responsible for criminal and civil cases such as murder, robberies, misuse of public funds, and inappropriate behaviour during elections. They could only give the death penalty to foreigners and slaves, and in civil cases they were limited to lawsuits whose value did not exceed 15,000 sesterces, or defamatory trials whose limit was 10,000 sesterces. They made judgments about electoral candidates without the required qualifications, and unworthy members of the city council, or decurions. Every 5 years they were elected as quinquennial duumviri to take the census and control morality. Election to the position of aedile allowed a man to stand for higher office and the possibility of future entry into the council. Aediles administered sacred and public buildings, maintained roads and sewer systems, regulated markets, maintained public order, sponsored spectacle and theatre. The city council, or Ordo Decurium, was the legislative arm of the government. It was composed of 100 members, or decurions, chosen from ex-magistrates. Membership on this council was for life, and only became available with the death or disgrace of a member. Every 5 years the list of decurions was revised. The city council debated and voted on issues affecting the administration of the city and advised the board of 4. The People's Assembly was only convened for the election of magistrates. It is believed that the city was divided into voting precincts, and members voted as individuals or as part of a guild. Voting was by ballot, perhaps by a tablet placed in an urn. The candidates for the magistracies, duumviri and aediles, had to receive an absolute majority of the voting precincts. And this is from C. Amory and B. Curran. They say, Aulus Claudius Flaccus, son of Aulus of the Meninia voting group, 3 times chief magistrate, once in the special 5th year. Buildings associated with formal government. One of these buildings has been designated as the Curia Chamber, a lavishly decorated space where the city council is believed to have met. Another adjacent roofless building has been suggested as Comitium, a place for the People's Assembly and for town meetings where citizens could question the members of the government. The evidence for heavy gates suggests that some meetings might have been quite boisterous. It might have also been used on polling day. On the other side of the so-called Curia Chamber was a small building labelled the Tabularium, or Archives, where all the government businesses were recorded and filed, including tax records, and next door were believed to have been the offices of the magistrates. The Basilica, one of the finest buildings in the town with its long two-storied central hall, flanked on either side by a colonnaded aisle and raised podium at the far end, has been cited as the seat of the judiciary and law courts. Although the raised tribunal podium may have been where the magistrate as judge sat above the lawyers, witnesses, plaintiffs and defendants, to think of it as a permanently designated courtroom and nothing else would be to exaggerate the time spent in legal business in the town. Besides, there was evidence that disputes might have been dealt with informally elsewhere. The Basilica was possibly a business centre, but whatever its various purposes, the graffiti, often of an angry or abusive nature, scrawled on its outer walls, indicates that large numbers of people gathered or idled around it. Election fever. About half of the electoral manifestos and propaganda discovered in Pompeii relate to the election of March 79 AD. Earlier slogans were whitewashed over to make advertising room for the next group of candidates. Eligibility to vote and stand for office. While freeborn male citizens were permitted to vote, some, like actors, were considered unworthy. It should be remembered that the total voting population of Pompeii would have been small, perhaps no more than 2,500, with maybe an extra 5,000 eligible voters from the local rural areas. Ex-slaves were eligible to vote, but no matter how wealthy they were, they could not stand for office, and women, despite incredible wealth or influence, could neither vote nor stand for office. It appears, however, from the thousands of electoral notices painted on the walls that most people, including women, were politically aware and enthusiastic. Also, because most people in the city knew each other, those who supported the candidates were in some form of personal relationship with them. When it came to eligibility for office, however, not just any citizen was permitted to become a candidate for one of the four magistracies, juviri or aediles. Two essential requirements were reputation and wealth. What voters were interested in was the personal integrity and prestige of the candidate. Electoral manifestos usually included some references to these qualities. Worthy of the Republic, most worthy, most upright, excellent, virtuous, lives a reserved life. Also, only men of wealth could become candidates for the highest offices because they were not paid and were expected to make generous cash contributions to the public funds, around 10,000 sesterces, and benefactions in the form of sponsoring public spectacular shows and games in honour of a particular god, dedicating buildings or statues, and renovating public buildings that needed it. Status came at a price. To put it another way, when Pompeian voters were choosing between different candidates for office, they were choosing between competing benefactors. Old money counted for more than recently acquired wealth. That was again Mary Beard.
Prior to an election, a candidate wore a white toga in public to identify himself and employed the slave to whisper his names or who came in contact with whom he came in contact. However, candidates did not write the manifestos themselves or sign them. This was done by family, friends, dependents, or even particular trade guilds. They did not make electoral promises about tax cuts, road maintenance, or a public building program. Boast about what they did in the past. Support for candidates. Those who promoted a particular candidate usually employed a signwriter to paint their advertisements on walls outside houses, both inside and outside bars and taverns, and even on public buildings. These election posters usually followed a standard form which has been described as declamatory rather than persuasive. For example, Versonius Primus urges the election of Gnaeus Helvius as aedile, a man worthy of public office. They could be signed by individuals, family members, neighbours and clients. Even grandmothers were recruited to support a family member. Vote for Lucius Popedius Sabinus. His grandmother worked hard for his last election and is pleased with the results. Groups, including trade corporations or guilds. For example, in one election, the pastry vendors backed Trebius Valent as aedile. The muleteers or muleteers wanted to elect C. Julius Polybius as duumvir, and the fruit merchants urged people to vote for M. Ennium Savinum as aedile. The Phalones asked for votes for Alconius Priscus as aedile, and the goldsmiths supported the candidature of Caius Cuspius Pansa for aedile. Judging by one graffito, teachers and students joined in the campaigning. Teacher Sema, with his boys, recommends Junius Simplex for the job, and Acelina, a female innkeeper, and a group of women supporters who call themselves Acelinae, had an electoral slogan painted on the wall of her inn, urging customers to vote for Caio Lolio Fusco as aedile. However, when C. Julius Polybius was running for office, a manifesto signed by two prostitutes appeared on a wall. He was furious and demanded that it be removed. Not everyone, however, was always happy with the chosen duumviri, and just as with modern cartoonists and voters, Pompeian graffitists drew caricatures and gave advice on how to run the city. Here's my advice: share out the common chest, for in our coffers piles of money rests. As in all political systems, there would have been a degree of corruption. The narrator in Petronius's novel of the freedman Trimalchio gives a fictitious, although realistic sounding, account of such a case. No one gives a damn about the way we're hit by the grain situation. To hell with the aediles. They're in with the bakers. You be nice to me and I'll be nice to you. So the little man suffers. This place is going down like a calf's tail. Marcus Epidianus paid for a sundial in the precinct of the Temple of Apollo. The Decurions dedicated statues to C. Cuspis Pansa and Q. Salicius, and both the city and private individuals dedicated buildings to the Emperor Augustus. Despite the fact that the forum in Herculaneum has not been unearthed, we know of the benefactions of three leading citizens: Lucius Annius Memnianus Rufus, who funded the building of the theatre, Marcus Calatorius, whose bronze statues stood in the theatre amongst those of emperors and empresses, and Marcus Nonius Bulbus, to whom 10 statues were dedicated around the town at important sites. Aelius Clodius Flucus provided in his first term during the festival of Apollo in the Forum a procession of bulls, bull goaders, sidekicks, platform fighters, 3 pairs, boxing in groups and pairs, shows of all with all the musicians and pantomimes, and especially Pallades at the cost of 10,000 sterces paid to the city in return for his office. Alright, 2 prominent public figures. Marcus Herculaneum Rufus in Pompeii. He came from an old wealth family, the Herculaneum, one of the 4 wealthiest families in Pompeii, who dominated political office for generations. His family was extremely wealthy. Rufus is supposed to have earned his fortune by operating a clay pit and brickworks, along with his family's nationwide wine empire. Pliny referred to a Herculaneum wine as a local specialty. He was 5 times elected as duumvir and twice quinquennial. According to the inscriptions, he founded the renovation of the Temple of Apollo, and in a much larger improvement project, he and his brother, at their expense, built a covered gallery, the boxes and auditorium of the large theatre. He was also the patron of Pompeii, and as such was an intermediary between Pompeii and the Emperor Augustus. In his semi-official role, he intervened with the powers in Rome on behalf of Pompeii. He was awarded an honorary position as military tribune by Augustus on recommendations by the Pompeian community. A life-size statue of Herculaneum Rufus, now in the Naples Archaeological Museum, once stood at the crossroads of the Via dell'Abbondanza outside the Sabine Baths. Despite never being in the military, Rufus was dressed in the cuirass or breastplate of Mars, one of Augustus's divine protectors. Marcus Nonius Bulbus, Herculaneum. Marcus Nonius Bulbus came from the richest and most influential family in Rome, in Herculaneum. He had been Roman governor of Crete and Cyrenaica, a Roman possession in North Africa. He was patron of Herculaneum. At least 10 statues of him were erected at important sites around the town. He and his son, Marcus Jr., were depicted in magnificent marble equestrian statues that flanked the entrance to the Herculaneum Basilica, and the portrait statues of the rest of his family, mother Viceria, wife Volicinia, and 2 daughters, probably named Nonia the Elder and Nonia the Younger, stood inside. From the evidence, it is believed that the family owned the large house on the seaward side of the town, the House of the Relief of Telephus, which was connected by a staircase and 2 ramps to the magnificent suburban baths. Also, a statue placed in a sacred area adjacent to the baths indicates that Bulbus was the donor of the baths. He was also responsible for other public works. The impact of others in public life. It seems that other groups outside the male elite were honoured publicly in Pompeii, and these included a number of prominent women. One such group with the institutional structure to make some sort of social public impact, dedications and benefactions, were the Augustales, an organization of wealthy, powerful freedmen who, as their name implies, were in some way involved in the imperial cult, the worship of Augustus and subsequent emperors, although they were not a priesthood in the narrow sense of the term. They paid a membership fee to the treasury to join and are known to have sponsored banquets and buildings. Two influential women in Pompeii were Eumachia and Mamia. Eumachia was a woman of great standing in Pompeii despite her humble origins. She inherited a considerable fortune from her father, Lucius Eumachius, who made money from his brickworks. To increase her social status, she married into one of Pompeii's oldest and wealthiest families, the Numistri Frontones. Her new social position allowed her to assume the important public office of priestess of Venus, as well as matron of an imperial cult of Concordia Augustus, dedicated to the deified emperor. She became the patroness of the Guild of Fullers, one of the most influential in Pompeii, and provided the guild with a large and beautiful building in the Forum, the building of Eumachia, with a dedication on its facade in the name of herself and her son Marcus Numistrius Fronto. It is possible that her son was running for the public office of duumvir at this time, and the benefaction was perhaps intended to help him gain public support for his election. Eumachia, daughter of Lucius, public priestess of Venus, built the hall, the covered gallery, and the portico in her name and that of her son M. Numisius Fronto at her own expense. She herself dedicated it to Concordia and to Pius Augusta. In response to her generosity and symbolic of her influence and social status, the Fullers built a statue depicting her in the veiled form of a priestess with an inscription on the statue's pedestal. It was placed in the building she constructed. There is a replica of the original statue at the back of the building. Mamia, the daughter of Publius Mammius, was another highly regarded woman, a priestess who dedicated the building in the temple, in the Forum, the Temple of the Lares, and who, by a decree from the town council, was given a grave site for her very impressive tomb near the Herculaneum gate. Mamia, daughter of Publius, a public priestess, built this to the genius of the colony and Augustus on her own land at her own expense. Despite the wealth and influence of some women in Pompeii, such as Eumachia and Mamia, who held the public offices of priestesses, it was not the same as having the formal power of an elected duumvir or city councillor. Oh, that was a rather long chapter. Thank you so much for listening, Year 12.